I found out my own son was quietly trying to steal my house, the only thing I had left after my husband died, and instead of confronting him, I transferred the deed at 2 in the morning without telling him. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I just made a move he never saw coming. When he realized what I'd done, it completely shattered our relationship. So tell me honestly, before you judge me too harshly, was I wrong for protecting myself the only way I could? I never imagined I'd be the kind of mother telling a story like this. For most of my life, I was the one who sacrificed quietly. I raised my son, Daniel, mostly on my own after his father passed away suddenly from a heart attack when Daniel was just 12. Overnight, I went from being a wife with a partner to a single mother scrambling to keep everything together. The house we lived in wasn't fancy, but it was ours. My husband and I had worked for years to pay it off early. That house held every memory of our family, every birthday, every holiday, every late-night conversation in the kitchen when the rest of the world felt far away. After my husband died, that house became my anchor. It was stability in a time when everything else felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Daniel and I were close, at least I thought we were. I worked long hours, sometimes 2 jobs, to make sure he had what he needed. I missed school events, I missed some dinners, but I always believed he understood why. When he grew up, went to college, and later got married, I felt proud. I genuinely believed I had done my job. When his marriage fell apart a few years later, and he came to me asking if he could move back home for a little while, I didn't hesitate. He was my son. Of course I said yes. I didn't charge him rent. I cooked for him. I told myself this was just a temporary setback for him, and that I was lucky to still have him close. At first, everything seemed fine. He helped around the house, or at least he pretended to. We'd sit in the evenings and talk about his plans, about how he was going to get back on his feet, find a better job, maybe even start over somewhere new. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. He started making comments about the house. Little things at first, like how old it was, how much maintenance it needed, how expensive repairs could be as I got older. He'd casually mention that maybe it would be easier if everything was just in his name one day. I brushed it off as awkward humor or concern. I wanted to believe that's all it was. Then he started bringing up paperwork. He'd say things like, "Mom, do you even know where your deed is?" Or what would happen if something happened to you suddenly? He framed everything as concern for my well-being, and I let myself believe that because it was easier than admitting something darker might be going on. I trusted him. He was my son. I never once thought he'd betray me. The first real crack came when I noticed a letter on the kitchen counter one afternoon. It was from the county records office. I recognized the logo immediately because my husband had handled most of the paperwork when we bought the house, but I'd seen enough over the years to know what it was. My heart started pounding before I even opened it. Inside was information about property records, ownership verification, and instructions for requesting copies of deeds. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Daniel. I stood there staring at it, feeling this cold wave wash over me. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he was just being proactive. Maybe he was helping me organize things. But deep down, something felt very wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying all the little comments he'd made over the past few months. The way he'd talk about our house instead of your house. The way he'd get defensive if I mentioned maybe downsizing one day or leaving the house to charity or even selling it to travel. The next day, when he went to work, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went into his room. I hated myself for it, but I needed to know. In his desk drawer, I found copies of forms, deed transfer forms, estate planning documents, notes scribbled in his handwriting about capital gains, tax benefits, and acting before it's too late. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down on his bed. In that moment, the truth hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't just thinking ahead. He was planning to take my house without my consent, likely by manipulating me or waiting until I was too confused or vulnerable to stop him. I felt sick. I felt stupid. Mostly, I felt heartbroken. This wasn't just about a house. This was about trust. This was about my own child seeing me not as his mother, but as an obstacle, a problem to be managed. I didn't confront him right away. I needed time to think. I started paying closer attention to everything he said, everything he did. I noticed how often he talked about my age, about memory issues I didn't have, about how hard things get for people like you. He even suggested more than once that it might be smart to add his name to the house just in case. Each time he said it with a smile, with a tone that suggested he was doing me a favor. Every time it felt like a knife twisting a little deeper. I spoke to a lawyer quietly, without telling him. I told her everything. She listened, nodded, and then very calmly explained how vulnerable I actually was. How common it was for situations like this to escalate. How easy it could be for someone living with me to pressure me into signing something I didn't fully understand. She didn't tell me what to do. She didn't have to. I could see the warning in her eyes. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to wait for him to make the next move. I wasn't going to confront him and give him time to manipulate, gaslight, or guilt me. I was going to protect myself, quietly, legally, permanently. The night I did it, I barely slept. It was just after 2 in the morning when I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, rereading the email from my lawyer one last time. All the paperwork was ready. All it required was my authorization. My hands hovered over the screen for a long time. I thought about Daniel as a little boy, about how he used to run into my arms after school. I thought about my husband and how angry he would be if he knew what was happening now. I cried silently so Daniel wouldn't hear me through the walls, and then I pressed confirm. In a matter of minutes, the deed to my house was transferred into a trust that Daniel had no access to, no control over, and no way to challenge without exposing everything he'd been trying to do. When it was done, I felt an overwhelming mix of relief and grief. I had protected myself, but I had also accepted a painful truth about my son that I could never unlearn. So that was the situation I was in. I had evidence, fear, and a choice to make. Before I tell you what happened when Daniel found out, I want you to pause for a second and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Would you have confronted him? Would you have trusted him anyway? Or would you have done exactly what I did? It took 3 days for him to realize something was wrong. He came home from work looking frustrated, holding his phone, and asked me if I'd changed something with the house. I asked him what he meant, keeping my voice as steady as I could. He said he'd tried to access some property records and things weren't lining up. I told him calmly that I'd updated my estate planning. The look on his face shifted instantly. The concern vanished. In its place was anger, real, barely contained anger. He demanded to know what I'd done. When I told him the house was now in a trust and that he was not a beneficiary, he exploded. He accused me of not trusting him, of being paranoid, of letting outsiders influence me. He said everything he'd been doing was for my own good. I asked him, very quietly, why he had deed transfer forms hidden in his desk. He froze. For just a second the mask slipped. Then he doubled down, saying he was just preparing, and that I was overreacting. The argument that followed was the worst of my life. He said things you can't take back. He told me I was selfish, that after everything he'd done for me, I owed him, that he deserved the house because he was my son, that I'd regret this when I was old and alone. I listened. I didn't yell. I didn't insult him. I just listened, and with every word, I felt more certain that I had done the right thing. Within a week, he moved out. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't check on me. He told other family members his version of the story, and some of them believed him. I lost relationships I never thought I would. Holidays are quieter now, sometimes painfully so, but my house is still mine. My safety is still mine. My autonomy is still mine. The aftermath hasn't been easy. I grieved not just the relationship I lost, but the one I thought I had. Therapy helped, so did time. I've started making new plans for my life, plans that don't revolve around fear or guilt. I still love my son, but I love myself enough now to set boundaries he can't cross. Looking back, I wish things had been different. I wish he'd talked to me honestly. I wish he'd seen me as his mother, not as an asset, but I don't regret what I did. That late night decision saved me from a future where I would have been powerless in my own home. So that's my story. If you were on my side, if you believe protecting yourself is never wrong, even when it hurts, like this video. Subscribe if you want to hear more real, messy, unbelievable stories like this one. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole situation in the comments. I read them, and they matter more than you know. I'll see you all in the next story.